welcome everyone to my Tuesday afternoon LinkedIn Live. We're having a special type of a presentation today. We're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to all of our hearts as Jews. Adam Marx and I had this conversation back in October with what had gone on with Kanye West and Kyrie. Art Barchenko is our former temple president of ours, who's 90 years old, and he can definitely share different insights as to what's going on. And even though I labeled this anti-Semitism a while ago, this is more about just discussing a little bit what the experience is like, and Art can definitely speak to it, as well as he's working very closely in Patterson, which is one town over from us, about trying to meld together the African American and Jewish experience that we have there, because there are different types of discrimination, different types of comments. And I think we have to really develop a clear understanding as to what the shared experiences are. So I want to thank you, Adam, thank you, Arthur, and when I can speak to some very specific things that I noticed early on. I remember when I was in high school, there were events on a weekend, and one of those weekends was the Jewish holidays, and I was told by the people in charge, so it's only a Jewish holiday. Why can't you attend the event? And I said to myself, then what am I going to say? And my retort back is, well, if this was Christmas or Easter, would you have the event? And they said no. I said, so that's exactly the point. You have to understand what the differences are, and it's not a right or wrong thing. It's about understanding. We feel attacked as we are, but so do others. So I'd love to get some perspectives from you, Adam, because we were talking before about what's going on in Georgia and what's going on everywhere. I think it's really about being open about this discussion, in any way possible.
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing to say off the bat, and we were kind of chatting about this a little bit before we started the show, is that it's not something that is a memory. It's not an experience that used to happen and doesn't anymore. There's a lot of certainly here. I mean, there was a news story within the last year or two of swastikas found, big pictures, swastikas found in the bathrooms, at Cobb County high schools. Now, Cobb County is not like South Georgia or, along the Alabama border. Cobb County is, the Atlanta metro area. So a very high percentage of Jews compared to other areas of the state. And recently there have been weeks. I mean, last week it happened, a month ago it happened. Flyers that were viciously anti-Semitic in nature dropped around Sandy Springs, Alpharetta, Johns Creek. These are areas that are Atlanta metro and have high percentages of Jews comparative to other areas of Georgia, but are also not predominantly like Crown Heights, right, would be in New York. I mean, these are very, there's a high percentage of Asian residents, high percentage of Latino residents. So these are not exclusively predominantly Jewish areas. It's just a good mix of people from different backgrounds. And so when you have these kinds of this kind of material that's being dropped, I mean, imagine if you go outside to check the mail, or if your kid goes outside to check the mail and there's this material just sitting on the driveway, and it is threatening. It's not, it is threatening in nature.
See, I got to know Art really well. I mean, I've known Art for many years. Art is chairing one of a committee for our Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Israel Dresner, and he actually knows I remember Rabbi Dresner too, but he actually marched in the 60s, and we talk about this a lot alongside the African Americans. He actually knew Dr. King, and we're very passionate about him and about that whole issue. So I'd be curious, Art, from your perspective, how did you really get involved? I mean, what are your first memories about when you met with Rabbi Dresner and talked about different things? Because you probably know him in a much different way than me. I knew him as a congregant, and you knew him as a member of the board and in other ways too.
Well, we have to go back in time, unfortunately, and we have to recognize that the movement of Dr. Martin Luther King was really the codifying point and the structure of the Black movement. And Rabbi Dresner was always a gentleman who believed that all people are equal and should be given equal rights under all circumstances. That's his saying, is tikkun olam, repairing the world and making it a better place. And that's really what he stood for. And he and Dr. King became very close friends, very close allies, and it was Rabbi Dresner who really, along with Rabbi Friedman from Emmanuel, they were the driving force to muster the other rabbis from the conservative and reform movements to back the Black movement or the African American. I'm not sure I really agree with African American. They don't call me Ukrainian American. They don't call someone else Polish American. So the Black community is the Black community in my feeling. So there was a definite camaraderie and positive mentoring between the Black community and the Jewish community, and it was handed down through the congregations, both the churches and the synagogues. We also, I think, have to realize that it isn't only anti-Semitism that's been going on in this country, or racism. It's racism against all peoples. I mean, there are peoples against the Asians, there's peoples against the Muslims. The difference is that during the Martin Luther King movement and the Jewish support, I would say that the ADL and the other large organizations took on the KKK, if you remember, and basically put them out of business through financial means. So that was definitely a major movement throughout the country. But the hatred, in my opinion, was really in the closet. In other words, it's been there. We haven't really experienced it because they had no voice. And suddenly there became a voice, and this hatred spilled out into the streets throughout America.
Because I know.
And the other aspect of the problems that have developed also goes back to and relates to the Palestinian and Israeli situation. That spread in our campuses. The Palestinians and the so-called anti-Semites that use that as an excuse became very, very strong on our campuses throughout the country. And that manifested itself. So a lot happened from the time Martin Luther King, then Martin Luther King's assassination, and somehow the entire Black community separated from the Jewish community. Maybe not by intent, but certainly by some of their leaders who didn't have very nice things to say about the Blacks, including Jackson, who called the Jews Hymies in New York, Hymietown, and even Andrew, who spoke at our temple, by the way, if you remember, on one of
Andrew Young, yeah.
Andrew Young. And when he was representative at the United Nations, had some very bad comments to make. And so,
see, I know one of the things which we talk a lot about is the Holocaust. My father, who came to this country when he was 13, would never really didn't want to share a lot of his experiences about the Holocaust. He just didn't want to. We had a wonderful speaker this past week. And I think the knowledge that we have to bring on to other people, because how many people still claim it doesn't exist, and how many people have certain misconceptions. I think it's education as much as anything else. It's really falling upon all of us to educate each other. You know, we are all from one place. Now, did you want to comment to that, Adam?
Well, I want to, I wanted to tack on, the discussion and the debate around the complexity of the Israeli and Palestinian conflict
Uh-huh.
is a good example of something that is incredibly complex, and there have been lots of sides of the narrative. But what I think is important to underscore is, like, American Jews are not Israeli citizens. We're not voting in the Israeli elections. So to hold American Jews somehow responsible for the complex politics of another country halfway around the world is as ridiculous, frankly, as holding Chinese Americans responsible for the actions of the Chinese government, or holding other people responsible for governments that there may be some sort of a heritage or connection there, but it's not like I'm running out to Tel Aviv to vote in the elections. And so that particular conflict it's complex on numerous levels, and it's not it often becomes very oversimplified in the dialogues we have here, right? And it's like it becomes presented as a for us against us kind of a thing. It's like a dichotomy of with us against us. And I think it's necessary to underscore the fact that part of new anti-Semitism is this rabid and rapid rise of anti-Israel sentiment, right? That has enormous complexities that we just don't talk about. It's just not. It's often not part of the dialogue, and so without that being part of the dialogue, I mean, I'm a student of history, right? There's things are often never as simple, often as we make them out to be, and so that's fertile ground to have lots of conversations and learn and understand about different experiences. But it's not going to be solved within the confines of a 40-minute college lecture. That's not going to happen, because you can't possibly present the 60 some odd 100 year some odd disparity between what the narratives have been and what the lived experiences have been by a variety of different peoples. And so I think that it's necessary to at least acknowledge that as a fact.
Well, if I may,
Sure.
dialogue is the key, and if I go back to when we had the situation with Newt Miller in Wayne, where he said
Was the mayor of ours, yes.
he was the mayor of Wayne, and we had one person on the school board that was Jewish, and two other members of the Jewish community were going to run on the school board, and he basically came out and said, if you elect two more Jews to the school board, you'll have Christmas taken out of the schools. And everybody went wild. I mean, it was all over we were in London. We read about it in London, so it was worldwide. And I had happened to be president at the time. So there was a major meeting at the Patterson YMHA, and all of the major organizations showed up, the Jewish community, the AJC, the ADL. And to be perfectly honest with you, it was a little frustrating, because they were more concerned about who was going to carry the flag than solve the problem. And I said to them, I think the best way to approach this problem is not which of you organizations are going to take the lead, but how do we really communicate with the people in Wayne and develop a dialogue between and among all of the races, religions, etc., denominations. So at that time, we had a very lovable and outreaching rabbi by the name of Rabbi Shai Shacknai, who unfortunately died at 39. But he was very, very active in the Wayne Ministerial Fellowship at the time. And through the Wayne Ministerial Fellowship, the churches and the congregations, we set up blue ribbon panels and discussions at the homes of different people, arrange teas, luncheons, and what have you. Not lectures, but dialogue, discussing the concerns of each and the understanding of each and the impressions that one had about the other and so on. And in time, that really helped open up the community to the point where when Rabbi Shacknai died, the Christian church, Catholic church on Valley Road held a high mass for him. And Wayne Township dedicated a park, the Rabbi Shai Shacknai Park, and the community began to open up. Packanack Lake, Pines Lake, etc., began opening up their doors slowly, but they began opening it up. And more recently, in the work that I'm involved in the center, and with the Alliance, the Historical Society, New Jersey Historical Society, who obtained a grant. We obtained a grant to try to address this problem. It's the Jewish African American Alliance, it's called. And after discussing this with both sides of the team, it became apparent by many of the leaders that were there that you're not going to reach the adults as easily as we're going to reach the children. So programs relating to race, relating to what we're talking about here, should really be programs for the youth, and through the youth, maybe we'll reach the adults. So that's the path we're taking. And if you remember in the Jackie Robinson story, they were playing in Philadelphia, and I had no idea how racist Philadelphia was at the time when Jackie Robinson was playing. And everyone was screaming, nigger this, that, and the other thing. This little kid is sitting there with his father, and he's looking around. What's going on? And then he finally heard his father cursing and swearing, so he started cursing and swearing. So we're going to implement dialogue and programs of interest, whether it be musical, sports. For example, there's the Hinchliffe Stadium that's coming back to life.
Mm-hmm.
That stadium was the Negro League years ago. Mm-hmm. And there was also a Jewish league up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they came and they played here, and we went and the black community played there. And Paterson was a very mixed community. It was black and Irish and Italian and Jewish, etc. And as the Jewish people moved out, the businesses moved out, and the Irish moved out, and who remained was the blacks, then it became a more isolated community and one with many problems that they didn't ask for over time. So it's a challenge because we have spokespeople in government today, although we don't want to get into politics, mm-hmm. who are really opening the doors to this hatred, and the media is playing on it, and the media is adding to it, and so on and so forth. So the programs that we ought to think about is community-wide programs, certainly mm-hmm. for the youth, and discussion and dialogue opportunities.
See, I want to go back to something Adam said. We as American Jews are not blind to just support everything in Israel. It's not that simple. We don't have to agree with the politics there in some cases, and we have our opinions, but I think there's a perception by a lot of people that if you're Jewish, you support everything in Israel. You support everything that the government does. And there are no shades. And as you said before, Adam, there's different shades of this. We could have a conversation for days about the different things going on there, and it's not a right or wrong thing, and the whole political structure in the Middle East and everywhere else is very complicated. And I think it's an understanding as to the fact that there are no absolutes in this. You know, there are no absolutes with anything. We are not lockstep, and that's true of anything in this country too, or anywhere else. I mean, you're rolling your eyes. I'm sure you agree with that, Adam.
I'm just thinking about how ridiculous it would be to make the same sort of assumptions or accusations for somebody of Greek descent who may happen to be Greek Orthodox and hold that person responsible for whatever the Greek government might do or their economic issues, or somebody who happens to be of Russian descent, of which there are many Jews, right, and non-Jews, but someone who might be Russian Orthodox and hold them responsible for what's going on in Ukraine and the international politics of Russia right now. Like, it's just it's reductio ad absurdum. It's extrapolating something out to a ridiculous extent and then criticizing the result. If I butchered that, I apologize. But
no, you didn't butcher it. But let me say this, in keeping with what you're saying, Adam, and what you're saying, Ken. I have to again go back. I started going to Israel in 1969. I had a business in Israel, in Netanya. And in 1969, 1972, if you traveled Israel in those days, you were able to visit the camps, the Palestinian camps, and you realized that the leadership of the Palestinian people left. The architects, the engineers, the educators, they all left. They went to Saudi Arabia, they went to Bahrain, they went to Kuwait, et cetera, et cetera. And who was left? It was the poorest of the people that were left, and they were left in the camps for a long time until Yasser Arafat suddenly became their spokesman and their leader, who was basically a thief. And Yasser Arafat was not a Palestinian. So the people were misled from day one. Now, to move all the way forward, and I say this because you have to know history and you have to be able to talk about it in meetings and in coffee clutches and what have you, for the other people to understand really what's been going on. My wife and I served on a committee, a peace committee. It was sponsored by the college in Netanya, which is now a university. And we met in New York at the Hilton. We met in London at the RAF Club. We met in Israel at Netanya College. And believe it or not, we met with de Klerk from South Africa. I met with Gorbachev from Russia, Wahid from Malaysia, Ehud Barak from Israel, and on and on. They had representatives of many, many, many countries. And they had the representatives of so-called representatives of the Palestinian people. And we tried and met and discussed and discussed and discussed. And it was obvious that unless the peoples were prepared on both sides, meaning the Arab countries and the Arab side and the Palestinians, the Jewish state and the Western world, were prepared to really address the issue from the ground up, meaning hospitals, schools, roads, airport, port, industrial centers, in order to help build an economy that doesn't exist. Well, we never got anywhere. And after years of work and traveling back and forth, we felt that it was not a possible means of bringing peace and tranquility between the peoples on both sides. The Israeli side has as many right-wing radicals as the Palestinians have. And the Palestinian people, the majority, in my opinion, are not the ones throwing rocks and carrying on, because there are plenty of Palestinians and Druze and what have you that live and work in Palestine. They're citizens of Palestine. So that's why it is very complex, and most people would never, ever think of the complexity there. They only hear about what they see in the news. The Palestinians be throwing rocks and the Israelis are bombing them from the air and on the ground. But I think the only way to overcome it And I believe that there are areas in the United States throughout the different cities beginning to develop dialogue programs of getting together and discussing these issues and explaining, each side explaining their beliefs and why, and try to come out with an understanding, a better understanding of what's been taking place.
I mean, for me, it's important to have a historical perspective in addition, so I can pass that on to my kids. And I'm at a point where, and I'm actually going to post this from Judy Chanowitz. At Rutgers, the anti-Semitism is happening. Attacks on the Jewish fraternity house, accompanied by people throwing eggs. The goal of a conversation like this is just to have a conversation, which is an important first step. You don't. It takes some time, and people don't necessarily have a lot of time anymore, or even interest in delving into things. They want to have an immediate answer to things, and that's not possible. At least in my opinion. What do you think, Adam?
Well, I've heard of similar things gone on down here at Emory in Atlanta. The Jewish fraternity houses at University of Georgia, which has quite a relatively sizable Jewish student population. And these, we won't even get into the stuff that I've just read secondhand from, sources talking about what's going on at Stanford or Harvard or Yale. Okay. I mean, I went to school in Boston. And perceptions are very powerful things, right? Because I went to Brandeis University, which is, for people unfamiliar, about 9 miles outside Boston Metro, and is perceived as being a Jewish school.
Right.
Number one, it's not. Okay, it's officially non-religious, totally secular. Okay, and in fact, when I was there, it may have changed. It's been about 10 years. When I was there, the Jewish population didn't even break like 50%. I don't think. It was maybe in the 40s, maybe about 45%. There was a large population of non-Jews, so much so that there was, when I was there was one student a few years behind me who was, I can't remember what, Calvinist, Methodist, some branch of Christianity, and he had a particular way in which he wanted to pray, right? And he rented out a room in the student center once a week on Sundays, and the premise was, okay, he rented it for the entire semester for himself. Okay, and anyone else and some other people, I'm sure, came and prayed. But there was an encouragement of, okay, you don't have to fit into a box. People come from different backgrounds. And so perceptions are very, very powerful, because I can't count the number of times that I've had conversations with non-Jews and Jews, who I was a nice Jewish boy who went to a Jewish college, only it's not a Jewish college. So even perceptions in the Jewish community of a certain school or what it might represent may not reflect the reality of the diversity on a particular campus and the encouragement of diversity of background and experience and thought. So just what we might perceive either through the news, or through my friend told me this happened, and so now I'm going to draw a general characterization of a whole group of people, very often doesn't reflect reality. Like everything else that's being shared today, it's complex. It's like the hard thing about hard things is that they're difficult.
Yeah, there are no easy answers to things. I mean, I think a lot of times, and as Jews, we can be sometimes self-effacing about things. We kind of, do a lot of conversations, just whether it's an insecurity or a defense mechanism. I mean, we all kind of joke amongst ourselves about things, and I think we can be perpetuating some of this ourselves without even knowing it. But I think even different, even, and that's part of it. Judaism and Jewish is a culture, and Judaism is a religion, and I think sometimes they get kind of confused. And I think that's a big part of it too. You know, to try to lump everything together into a very common gift, common thing.
I mean, I think that there's a really, I wish I could remember the exact title of the book. There was a book that was, I think it's called Jews Don't Count, and it's by a British comedian personality, and I read that book cover to cover in one sitting. I mean, it's not a difficult book, but it was just very interesting, and it's about how the Jewish identity and experience is very broad and oftentimes gets simplified to the most common denominator of white, Eastern European through heritage, Ashkenazic in tradition, when there are Jews who are Mizrahi or Sephardic, Mediterranean, North African, who come from fundamentally different traditions. And so and have different skin tones and look differently. And so the simplification, the oversimplification of Jews into, okay, this is what a Jew is and what a Jew looks like and how a Jew acts and what their traditions are, is as damaging as saying, okay, this is what a Catholic person is, without taking into account, you know, are they someone French Catholic? Are they Italian in heritage, Irish in heritage, Polish in heritage? I mean, I could go right down the list. Maybe they're Brazilian, maybe they're Mexican. Okay, so Catholic, it can be lots of different skin tones, races, lots of different nationalities. I mean, that goes back to the concept of where the nation state, you know, evolved and grew out of. That's a whole different historical conversation, but it's as ridiculous as that. And
sorry,
no, I was going to say, and so that's part of the difficulty in what is a Jew.
I think part of it is we have to supposedly assimilate in this country with everything around us that is not Jewish, if you will, you know, and there's a frustration for some of us. I mean, Hanukkah is not Christmas, despite what anything is. It's not Christmas.
I mean, does anybody else find it funny? I find it funny because I laugh kind of ruefully at it, but like, Christmas is a holiday all about peace and love and light. That's great. Hanukkah is a story that's predicated on struggle and war and winning against a bigger opponent. I mean, it's more inherently combative. And I just think it's a little bit funny that because it falls so close to Christmas most years anyway, that it's often associated as the same sort of peace, love, and light. And Hanukkah's not about that. Never mind the fact that it's a very minor holiday. It's about struggle and combat. And it's not as I'd say warm and fuzzy as Christmas is. Certainly my experience of the American Christmas experience, which is, you know, warm cookies and the fireplace and just nice, you know, experiences.
I mean, we have a saying in our religion: the holidays are coming early or late, they're never on time. And that goes part of it to the idea that we operate off a lunar calendar as opposed to a solar. But again, these are just perpetuations of things we talk about. And I think, and Art, you've been around a lot longer than me. You can probably speak to some of what goes on now versus what used to go on. I mean, anti-Semitism now has a different face than it did back then. Now it's, I think, and you talk about between the African Americans too. I mean, there's hatred and there's basic frustration and almost like it's almost like, you know, can you top this now with everything that's going on? Like who has it worse? Sometimes it almost seems that
Yeah.
way. What do you think, Arthur?
Well, first of all, it's called JMT, Jewish Mean Time.
I'm going to remember that.
And
That's very good.
and the problems today, as I think, well, let's step back and look at some positive things.
Sure, of course.
Jews have taken dominant roles in American life, politically, industrially, educationally, etc. Um, the scary thing that I see, what's going on in this country, is that in the 1930s and early 40s, and Adam, you're a historian, Germany was the greatest republic, democratic country. The Jews had voting rights in Germany against most other countries where they didn't have rights. They had outstanding positions in education, in medicine, all culture, and almost every walk of life. And a guy came along that everybody thought was a joke, and he became the head of Germany and killed 6 million plus maybe 5 million other people. So, do we learn from the past how something like that could possibly happen? Because if you take a look at America today, we have the same privileges and the same rights and the same professors and heads of corporations and everything else. And all you're hearing today is hatred against everybody. It isn't only anti Semitism. Um, there are black Jews too. There's quite a percentage of black Jews. So I think what we have to do, I mean, personally, is find a way to communicate what we're talking about to mixed groups, to mixed communities, and to possibly, where we have connections, work with the media to start to promote some of the positive rather than all of the negatives that's going on in what we see and what we read and what we hear. It's every day. And I mean, I'm head of the security group at Temple Bet Tikva besides the library. So, and my business is security. I said, look what's happening in all of the synagogues and places of worship. What about the churches? What about the mosques that are being hit? So it's really a racial situation that's going on. And of course, the Jews, who for whatever reason always stand out, is the anti-Semitism is what you see and hear about more. But what about all the black prosecutions? What about the Muslim? What about the Oriental? So it's an overall hate situation in this country that has to be stemmed somehow. And to be perfectly honest with you, the only way I can see to do it is through cultural, educational, social means of meeting and speaking to people and expressing what we're expressing today about Jews and Judaism versus Christianity, which has so many sectors, the same as we, and so on. I mean, that's the only thing, and I think it's beginning to happen slowly but surely. People are waking up to the fact that you can't live in a country of hate.
I think part of what's so important in addition to that, or maybe using that as an on-ramp, is having a more robust discussion about differences of background and experience, more than just acknowledging that one person, and the second person may come from different religions and pray in different ways. I think it would be very palpable for other communities that are experiencing violence and feeling targeted, whether that is based on race or based on gender or based on orientation, whatever it is. I think it would be a very palpable message if there was a better way of communicating that, and when I leave my house, you just low key accept the fact that you're walking around with a target on your back. And certainly I do down here. Maybe it's different in New York, but it's just part of how I live. And I'm not living in, a very tiny town. I'm living in a pretty significant city metro area. So fostering conversation around experiences of vulnerability is very powerful, because when it doesn't leave now just one group feeling like the vulnerable group that's always being targeted. And I think it's important the navigation of that is very difficult and very important and fragile, because as we said at the beginning, we don't want it to devolve into a who has it worse. What we really want to communicate amongst a variety of different groups is that we feel this too. We understand this kind of fear, and we can work together to kind of root that out. I mean, a year and a half ago, we had these shootings at in Atlanta at these Asian businesses. Okay. And so there was a big upswell from the Asian community here, but as well, there should have been, but there was also an upswell from the Black community and from the Jewish community trying to be a part of the dialogue in a way that was expressing we're with you. Okay. We don't want to see this happening either, because if it happens to one group, it's going to happen to a variety of other groups. It's just a matter of time. So having that kind of conversation of open vulnerability can, I think, begin to bring down some of those perceived barriers.
Well, I mean, this is a very important conversation to have. I know that recently, when Robert Kraft, who was the owner of the Patriots, he came out with that campaign, that definitely helped understanding of what's going on. And I think we really just have to have a clear and open dialogue. Not everything is rah rah rah. Not everything is right or wrong. And I think there's a tendency to try to be that specific. I mean, there's no one right or wrong answer, and people have to be willing to have conversations and be open and honest and upfront, because we can agree to disagree. I don't know when that became something you couldn't do anymore, but it seems to be the case now. Did you want what Arthur?
The question we have here, and the question I think that has to be answered, is how best can you arrange groups for the kind of dialogue that you're talking about having? Because although we're talking about it among ourselves, until you have the opposite with you, you're not achieving anything. So sure. That's the challenge on what type of programs, what type of events would bring people together, other than everybody getting together when someone is killed or murdered or mocked up and they all run out on the street. Running out on the street shows solidarity for a very short period of time, but everybody goes back to their own homes and they're back again where they were. How do you continue that? How do you perpetuate that into real dialogue and understanding of that we're all talking about?
I don't know. It's one of those things where I wish I had an answer today. I think that certainly for people maybe in their late teens, 20s, college, post-college age, I wonder if maybe some of the ways to reach people and create opportunities are through non-religious, non-traditional event kind of means. And what I'm thinking about is, something as I would love to see like an intercultural. I'm sure there are. I don't do events in that context, but something that is universal, like food. Food is universal. And I have this really vivid memory. My sister and I brought a bunch of latkes one year to our like friend group, Secret Santa group kind of a thing. And I mean, there were like 3 or 4 trays, and they were all gone. I mean, it was people who'd never had them were like, this is the best drunk food ever. And when you reach somebody on that level through a shared experience, because every culture has food where you go, wow, this is amazing. What have I been missing? That provides now opportunities to have conversations around narrative and perspective. I mean, that's just, it's not like the answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are lots of people doing those kinds of things, but I know for me, I would feel a little intimidated. Let's say going to like a full-on Easter dinner, because there's an overlay of not wanting to insult somebody's faith or tradition, not being really 100% aware of what's right and wrong, but just going to somebody's house and experiencing their food, whether it's African dishes, Asian dishes, Polynesian dishes. That's something I can get behind because it's very accessible to me, and it's a good on-ramp to talk about traditions. I'm sure there are lots of people doing it, but that's something that I would find more accessible without the onus of not wanting to, improperly act, within the context of a faith.
Well, I'll tell you, talking about food, and my associate, one of my vice presidents, Ronald Thomas, who is a black man, black engineer, wonderful guy. He's also a minister. He decided to become a minister later in his life. And we've been communicating because of his interest in social action programs and my interest in social action programs. He just sent me an email that I'm going to share with you later, where they had a black church and a synagogue produced a Haggadah. And they had a Seder together, a tremendous Seder, where everyone had an opportunity to eat and meet and greet and talk, etc. So that's all wrapped into one, Adam, what you were talking about before. Those kinds of events, I think, are very important. One of the things that we're hoping to achieve in Patterson is to have attend the ball game there. We're working on getting some 100 tickets, of which a black church with maybe 50 people and our kids with 40 or 50 people will get together for the game, then go through the museum and sit down and talk. Exchange ideas, exchange experiences, etc. So that's a program that we're working on right now. And I think that that's what we have to think more about.
Sure.
And the question is, with whom and how? In other words, years ago, whether it works today or not, and that's another problem. Years ago, we had the Wayne Ministerial Fellowship. They were able to work together. Today, I can tell you that, again, because of the economics and social problems and what takes place, it's very difficult to get some of the churches in line, only because they have too many of their own problems within their organization, including the synagogues. In other words, there's so many problems locally that people have to take care of their community that they have no time to even talk about this, even though they would like to. And that's somewhat of a problem in itself, But Adam, I want to tell you, I'm sorry to hear that you feel like you have a target on your back, because that could be, really a very unpleasant situation. And I think that we as Jews have to walk out with our head high and our shoulders back and do what we do every day and what we have to do. Take care of problems in the community, work with the community, expose ourselves to different organizations so that they see us and know that we're part of the community and we're working for the betterment of mankind, and that we're not held up someplace counting on money, because that's the image. The money.
And that's a great way to end this conversation, I think, on a high note. So I want to thank you, Adam and Art, very much. And we will continue this conversation offline. This is a near and dear topic to me and to Adam and to Art. So I appreciate your time, everyone. Have a great day, and we will see you again soon.
Okay, you as well.